Greetings, friends of the apocalypse. Welcome to Podcast at Ground Zero, your home of the apocalypse, for episode 43, Language After the Apocalypse. Tonight is going to be about language. I am your host, as well as
we speak good.
Yeah, apparently it's the apocalypse here. So
we will be smart. We will make the show go.
We make go. We make go. So
we make go.
Your host, Jared the Apocalypse Nerd Wallace, Adam Bob Glancy, and special co-host William T. Thrasher this week will be joining us for a discussion of language in the apocalypse. So, just for the folks, we're going to talk about language, written and verbal language. We're going to theorize and speculate what's going to happen to it after it all goes to shit, and the structured education system is gone to teach people how to read and write. So, but before we do that, we'll do our normal rounds of in the news, and I don't have a whole lot this week. I haven't really been digging too much for it. I did see, for folks who have Xbox Ones, the State of Decay game, which was on the 360, is going to be coming out for Xbox One soon. So you'll be able to check that out. I also saw a nice extended trailer for the Mad Max video game, which is not coming out until September, so they didn't even tie it in with the freaking movie, unfortunately. But the video game,
or maybe fortunately,
yeah, we'll see. But the video game looks pretty good to be. I'm like, it's like an open environment. Get to do a lot of stuff. I'm like, wow, this actually seems a little more interesting than the movie to me right now. And I know that's blasphemy. I know everybody is excited for the movie, and people are taking days off, and I'm like, I'm just not there yet.
We will see. Question, sir. I didn't see the trailer for the Mad Max video game.
It was on the Xbox. It was on the Xbox One, so it was.
Then that's why I wouldn't with my 360. Maybe I would have seen it on YouTube or social media. But here's a question for you: is the game built around your car as the character that you improve and upgrade, or is it about your character in the car?
Both.
Okay, good. Because, yeah.
It talks about building your car, improving your car, getting new equipment for it, but also building your character, getting new skills, how to survive there, how to go to communities, and how to it seemed pretty. The games, from what I've seen, it seemed interesting. But then again, I've been burned many times before.
All right, are you playing Max Rakatansky, or are you playing your own created character?
As far as I know, you're playing Max.
Okay, fine. That's fine.
But it's the new alternate universe, Mad Max.
It's post-crisis continuity Max.
Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, no, I don't know. Like I said, this movie, people are saying it's not a reboot, it's a continuation. No, it's not the fifth movie, you dumb shits. If it was the fucking fifth movie, there wouldn't be. You wouldn't even have.
They would have to be far more beyond Thunderdome than it is currently.
Exactly.
What do you mean fifth? Am I missing something?
Fourth. I'm sorry.
All right.
One, two.
If there's another movie out there, I'd like to know about it, please.
Oh, you don't know about the fourth Mad Max movie that was out?
My nerd.
The secret one that only cool people can see.
Oh yes.
Only Will and myself have seen it. You have it?
Clearly, I do not measure up. Oh my God.
No, but a lot of people are saying, of course, like I said before, everybody's like, it's not a reboot. It's really not. It's kind of one of those. It is a kind of re-envisioning from somewhere between, I think, Mad Max, unless I'm completely fucking wrong, but everything I've seen indicate that it's after the original, but kind of, eliminates the beyond, the Mad Max 2. Yeah, Mad Max 2.
Otherwise, where did the last of the V8 Interceptors come from?
Exactly. Would he find another one? It's the last.
The other last of the V8 Interceptors, yeah.
So I saw that. Looks, like I said, it looks pretty interesting. Again, they've been showing better trailers for the movie, like we've talked about before. So I'm like, I'll try to go in a little more open-minded, but we'll we'll wait and see. I don't know.
What else are we gonna what else are we gonna do with our time? You know, go see the Star Wars. Go see the the Star Wars film. No.
Well, that doesn't come out till Christmas. But you know what? The last trailer they did, I'm like, well, maybe it won't be as bad as those other 3 movies they made because George Lucas is not involved in it, and
that can only improve it.
Yeah, and of course,
that can only improve it.
Yeah, and of course, it's being done by the guy who did the Star Trek reboot. So, and he did.
And what a fine job he did on those.
He did a reasonable job. So we'll see what happens. So.
Now, my question is Wilford Brimley's character going to be showing up in the new trilogy? You may not remember, but Wilford Brimley did play a Star Wars character in the second Ewok movie.
The second Ewok
And yes,
movie.
there was a second Ewok movie.
Is this like the 5th? Is this like the 5th Mad Max film you were talking about? Because
No, there is
don't think
Ewok's Caravan of Courage. It was a TV movie made in the height of, I think, the time that George Lucas was dating Linda Ronstadt, and
as if that explains everything.
Wilford Brimley plays this grizzled old navigator whose ship is stuck on Endor.
But wait, does he go at one point, "I'll kill you," and start shooting at the Ewoks?
Because that would be okay.
No, but he does talk about oatmeal.
And diabetes. Bring up the diabetes. You Ewoks all look like you should be watching your blood sugar.
Last night. Oh, I don't remember who does it. I think it was in The Critic. They make fun of Wilford Brimley, like they make fun of the diabetes commercials or something. It's like last night I beat up my wife. My wife's been dead for 10 years. Who did I hit? You know, it was like something like.
Oh my god!
It was something like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to dig that one up. I'll post that one. It's just like it's hilarious. So anyway,
let's hope that Wilford Brimley does not return. Much in the same way, I hope that Art Carney and B. Arthur do not return.
Well, you never know. He could have an awesome action sequence like Yoda, a CGI Wilford Brimley doing backflips and catching lightning bolts and throwing them back.
Because that made it so much better.
I would pay to see a CGI Wilford Brimley do that.
Yeah, but because of that, now when people ask us who's the man, we can tell them Yoda Man.
All right. Well, I'm disconnecting you from the call.
Yeah, can we just get rid of...
It was great while it lasted.
If I may quote Harrison Ford, "Get the fuck out of my house," okay? Have you seen that where they do the David Blaine thing, where David Blaine does a trick in front of Harrison Ford, and Harrison Ford's response is, "Get the fuck out of my house"?
Yes, I have seen that.
You shouldn't do that to a guy who's that high. You know, you really shouldn't do, card tricks that cards are found inside pieces of uncut fruit on Harrison Ford's dinner table. Yeah, shouldn't do that to a guy who's that stoned. Not fair.
So anyway, that's like I said, I didn't really have a whole lot of posted. There's been a lot of stuff, that's floating around. Like, like I said, a good source of stuff that I find is on Quiet Earth. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that website. Quiet Earth. They start off with mainly post-apocalyptic media movies, but they do some other stuff too. But a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff. And they're always posting a lot of good stuff for like shorts and movies and things coming out. So that's always a good source, folks, for that. Also, I am caught up. With the exception of the show being recorded right now, all the shows, the audio is posted on the blog. All the audio is up now. So if you want to listen to the audio, any of the episodes, just go to the blog, go to the post tab, and they're all listed there. And as well as if you are an iTunes, subscriber, you can find Podcast at Ground Zero on iTunes, and you get to find them all there as well. So we are current with all the episodes. It took a little while, but it's all there. So all our friends of the apocalypse on the go can just download them and listen to them on their favorite media device.
Most excellent.
And that's it there. Well, if Scott, if you said you had a couple things to share as well, if you are ready for that, sir.
There's one.
Okay.
First is I finally got around to cracking open Black Moon.
Oh yes, I remember.
Which is the insomnia apocalypse, where civilization has got, I don't know, 100 hours maybe of not sleeping before everyone's bug shit crazy and dead. And it's I've read the first chapter. The first chapter feels like it was a novella or a short story that somebody wrote, that has then been expanded, and you know what I mean? It feels very self-contained. That opening chapter is a great introduction into this world that is falling apart. And one of the sort of creepiest things is the collapse of, and it's related to our story, it's the collapse of language. As people become more and more sleep deprived, their ability to communicate in anything that sounds other than word salad just gets worse and worse and worse. And the first character we're introduced to is a guy who's desperately trying to not be spotted as a sleeper, because it has turned out that the people who can't sleep apparently resent in their deranged madness those who can, and they will murder you, including his wife. And so he's learned to speak the gibberish so he can move amongst it. It's like them covering themselves with guts to move amongst the zombies, because at this point in the story, there's not enough death yet. Right? The cities are not cleared out. It's not, however many hours in. People are still being mad and crazy, and there's actually one point where there's a disturbance, and the police arrive to stop it, and the cops are all just wearing mismatched uniforms, and one of them's naked and shooting a machine gun into the crowd. And it's like, oh, good. The authorities are here to bring the situation back into control. Naked guy wearing a hat, wearing a police hat, firing a machine gun into the crowd. It's just him, his ass, and his boots. It's like, oh yeah, things are gonna be fine. I'm sure. Oh, it's CDC in Atlanta. They're right on top of this.
Wow.
So that's the kind of Jared. It's got that going down the shitter thing that you like.
Black Moon.
Yeah, Black Moon, by a guy named Kenneth Calhoun. And so far I'm enjoying it. I have not finished it. More reports later. In the self-aggrandizement department, I would like to point out that I just got back from the CthulhuCon PDX in Portland, which was a Cthulhu convention run by the guys who do the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, Oregon. They put on a great show. It was an enormous amount of fun. I got to run some games. I got to be on some panels. Heather Hudson won the Pictman's Apprentice Challenge, where these artists come in and have to do timed art challenges. So Heather Hudson, who's a longtime Paganista, got to take home a lovely Cthulhu trophy from the event.
Yes, I saw that, which is good, because I know when she was going into it, she was like, well, I'll take up some of my Cthulhu stuff. And it's like, she's just so good and done so much stuff. She really needs to know that, Heather, you're good. You did all this stuff,
Yeah. So her getting the trophy is enormous to me, because, she blew everyone else out of the water. She really did.
Oh, yeah. Well, I use her all the time. You know how good she is. I know she asked me to show some of the recent work that she's done for me to have to show, I believe. So. Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, speaking of blown out of the water, and of course everyone knows Django. Speaking of blown out of the water, Brian Callahan, the guy who runs the festival, got some sort of intestinal issue, like life-threatening perforated intestine problem, and he's out for the count. So I've been drafted at the last possible second to be the replacement Brian for going down to the San Pedro H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, which I've never been to, but now because Brian's out of the running, I get to be the substitute Brian and get my bills paid for and get to go down for free. And so I will be seeing people. If you're going to the San Pedro H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, I will see you there. I'm in touch with Aaron Vanek. He didn't know I was going to be there, but maybe we can set up a game for some of the people down there and run some Call of Cthulhu. I don't know. We'll see.
Is that this coming weekend, Scott?
It's this coming weekend. It's May 3rd. Is it 2nd and 3rd? It's this
Friday,
coming
Friday and Saturday.
Yeah, this Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
First, second, third.
Yeah, it's first, second, and third. Friday, Saturday, Sunday in San Pedro, California. We'll post a link in the show notes. I realize it's short notice, but if anyone was already going to be there, you get bonus Glancy, whatever that means.
Well, we can never get enough Glancy, except for now.
Wow.
So
you get more than just a glance of Glancy. You get a good hard stare.
And I want to point out that one of the events that they had at the festival was an event called Scotch with Scott, where they essentially just gave me a bottle of Lagavulin Scotch and had me drink it and tell increasingly off-color and off-putting stories to a crowd of people. And somebody whose name escapes me brought this amazing bottle of American straight whiskey. Really, it's a rye whiskey. It's a rye whiskey called Ransom. And it's made up in Sheridan, Oregon, in what is their wine country. And I've had Northwest distilled spirits before and not been impressed at all. But this is actually a good, solid rye whiskey. And so wherever you are, send me a message and say, I'm the guy who sent it. And I'll send a picture because then we'll know who you are because he was distinctive.
So now it's an event. Now I've been getting that event for nothing for years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now people have to pay for it. Now that it's a big deal, people have to pay to get in. So, anyways, excellent time was had by all. Not a lot of apocalypse, and I got to tell you that maybe that is the next panel we should push for is Cthulhu as apocalypse. That is the post-apocalyptic Cthulhu. What in Lovecraft generally presents an apocalyptic or a post-apocalyptic vision of the future? Because there's little tiny hints throughout his stories that suggest a post-apocalyptic, not merely dystopic, but a post-apocalyptic future.
Oh yeah, well,
that sounds like
people have definitely written stuff post-apocalyptic Cthulhu stuff.
Yeah, I have not got the collection Reign of Cthulhu, but Reign of Cthulhu is all stories set after we've been praying, after they've come back, after the stars are right, and we're a couple of steps down the food chain.
Okay, cool, very good.
It makes me think I've got to reread Shadow Out of Time now for the fourth time.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Multiple apocalypses are hinted at in that book.
Oh yeah.
Yes, they are.
All right, so let's talk about the apocalypse. Let's talk about how we speak after the apocalypse. Let's talk about language in the apocalypse, because we had kind of talked about it a little bit on our previous show for communications breakdown, because we talked about conveyances, and that led us to hey, let's talk more about language. So I know Will brought some stuff up. We're like, well, let's save that for language, the language show. So, all right.
Where do you want to kick off?
That's a good question. Will, would you like to start us off, talk about language in the apocalypse? You got some thoughts, feelings, things you want to bring up?
As the guy who broached it last time, you get the lead.
Well, I'll say, right off the bat, I mean, there are lots of angles we're going to have to hit on this, but one thing I really wanted to start out with, just because it's one of my favorite things in any fictional setting, but slang. What is our, assuming English survives, what is our slang going to sound like, and what words are going to take on new meanings because things have changed? Just like right off the bat, thinking of some of the post-apocalyptic RPGs and LARPs we've done. I did a post-apocalyptic LARP a few years ago where very quickly this new slang developed where saying something glows was a very harsh criticism of something, because what glows? Radioactive objects and areas that are gonna kill you. So if somebody says, "Oh, I've got a great idea," and someone says that idea glows, well then it's a bad idea because it's gonna get people slowly killed.
I like that it's close to blows.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say that. It's kind of like blows. That glows, So, absolutely, because the biggest thing, when I think about how language is going to develop, because we got slang. Slang is perfect, peppered all through just stories that are not post-apocalyptic, because you have things like A Clockwork Orange, where they have that language, that slang, the different words. It already exists, the sub-language everywhere in a language where we have, people.
All cultures have a sub-language. Hell, just simple stuff like urban slang, shorty, little simple things like that are, in fact, they're sub-language. You're absolutely right.
Dialects, thank you. Sub-language. I don't want to call it sub-language instead of the proper term dialect.
Well, sub-language is the ones they speak in the subway. The mutants that live in the subway speak sub-language.
So that's the Chud language, is what you're trying to say?
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. That would be the Chud language. That would be a Chud language.
So you have to, because we already have dialects already. Southern dialect. It's already like say somebody who grew up in, say somebody lives in New York, and they go to the deep South. They're gonna have trouble understanding them in certain areas.
However, I would point out that even the dialects we have today, and I immediately think of, sort of that urban hip hop dialect that you get. That follows a media outlet. That follows music, right? That dialect was spread through mass media,
it's perpetuated by it.
Yeah, and it's in different urban areas. Because it's not growing up in isolation. It's kind of this top-down dialect that's been created. Simultaneously, our modern media has been killing dialects. Our accents really are going away because everyone's speaking that sort of Midwest.
That neutral Midwest.
Yeah, accentless America. It is. If you watch stuff from like Talkies, I'm so old. You watch films with sound or newsreels from the 30s and the 40s, you'll hear much stronger regional accents from people. Much stronger regional accents, I think, than we do today, particularly from urban areas, because they're the ones most saturated. When that shit ends, when we have our technological crack, these accents, these dialects will not be created by a top-down, media. It'll develop incredibly isolated, in pockets.
Oh yeah.
One slang term might mean the exact opposite in a different area. So saying that glows might be misinterpreted depending on what part of the world you're in.
Well, that's true. I mean, if you're in a place that's managed to keep a certain level of technology going, it glows might be something good, because that means there's power in the system if the lights are coming on.
Yeah.
That's true.
Exactly.
I think it's definitely going to go back to more regional, more pockets, like you said, but then also the breakdown of the formal educational system, where everybody's kind of universally whether it's America or France or, Germany, where you're taught the language. Okay, this is how you spell things. This is how you say things. This is what things are. Like soda can, headphones. You're taught what specific things are. But when that goes away and it's just left to, the elders teaching the people, they're not going to be worrying about necessarily every little nuance, maybe major things. So some words might go away. Some things might be called different things altogether within a very, very short period of time.
I'm hoping the first casualty is I before E except after C, because as I understand it, that actual grammatical rule is one of the worst available, because
there are more exceptions to that than there are things that conform to that. Let's just start with the word science.
Yeah.
The word science, which I write a lot because I like to write the word science fiction. It's right there.
Yeah. And so hopefully that will be the first casualty of the grammar apocalypse. Will be I before E. Except
something that speaks to that, though, and you'll see this in a lot of comic books, but in some movies and some TV shows, that whenever it's like a post-apocalyptic scenario and there's like new, fresh graffiti, it's always spelled very phonetically.
Yeah. Yeah, at least in fiction, that's the first thing. It's like, how do you know you're in an alternate timeline? If there's Zeppelins. That's your first clue that you're in an alternate timeline. Your first clue that there's been an apocalypse is, or that there's been a collapse of civilization is all the graffiti is now phonetic on the walls.
And, and lots of Z's. Anything that's plural.
All plurals are now represented by Z's.
Well,
Mutants.
Well, because, and you're right, because if you're not being taught grammar, you're going to spell. I would think you would, by default, would spell things, for what little you know of spelling, would be, as you're learning it from people who may not be the best teachers of language, are going to spell things phonetically. Because like I said before, I'm a terrible speller. I'm bad with names. I would be dead in the water if I didn't have a freaking spell check. I get pretty close. I get pretty close most of the time because I've actually gotten better over the years. But if you would have got me back when I was in high school, forget about it. I couldn't spell for shit, dude.
Well, it would be a lot like the Middle Ages, where there is no formalized spelling. If you look at manuscripts from the Middle Ages, the same words will be spelled different ways based on where the person was educated and where they were living at the time, and also what letters are available. Because remember, we used to use F instead of S because we didn't quite have S in English yet. But taking that even further, let's assume I'm in a post-apocalyptic scenario. I would actually enjoy a more phonetic language. If I was in a position to be passing down the English language to the next generation, I would pass it down phonetically. I would simplify the spellings of things and just get rid of redundant letters and just make everything as phonetic as possible, which I feel would serve the purpose of making the language simpler and easier to teach, but also just easier to read. So even somebody who was taught classic English as it's taught now could still read it perfectly because it's spelled phonetically. Yeah, regardless of what they might think of us because we spelled things that way.
So when the astronauts come back and are released from suspended animation, they'll at least be able to read the new lawgiver laws that are hanging up in the in the temple of the bomb.
So
that would be handy.
So they probably should have done that when. Are you guys familiar with the Georgia Guidestones?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Which has written in multiple languages the rules of rebuilding civilization afterwards. It's like maybe they probably should have broken it down and done it in phonetic English, because that would have definitely been more post-apocalyptic.
Phonetic English, and then also maybe like the International Phonetic Alphabet, which has a rendering for every sound a human being can make with its mouth. It's really fascinating.
Wow.
Like there actually is a way to spell, and the way to spell, it's a K with a dot on top, and to spell it's like a K with a dot on the bottom. I had a professor of anthropology, Professor Unges, back when I was in college, who did a real quick crash course in the International Phonetic Alphabet. It was fascinating.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, now, this phonetic alphabet, though, is mostly Latin characters?
Yeah, pretty much Latin characters with certain sort of accents above and below them.
Okay. Interesting.
Wow. Well, Will's educated.
Well, thank you.
Yes, he is.
A broad base of knowledge.
But
easily applicable to many trades that produce copious amounts of money. like all of us.
Yeah, right. But the Georgia Guides actually, we're doing a road trip for a vacation this summer, and part of my plan is to, on our way home, to try to swing by to see the Georgia Guidestones. That's
nice.
As part of the plan.
We want footage.
Yeah,
video.
It's part of the plan. We'll see if we can pull it off, because it's really kind of like out of the way. From 95, it's like 4 hours out. So we're gonna see what we could do to try to make that happen. Yes, I'll definitely get pictures of that. But
good.
But also with language, what makes me think, especially with dialects and accents, like you said, it's because, like you said, Scott, it's becoming a little more neutral now. Because, like I said, I'm originally from New York. We moved down when I was 11. There's occasionally words here and there that poke through that says, "Oh, New York," but generally, I've been down here for 35 years. Okay, and a lot of people are like, "Well, where are you from?" Like, "Oh, I would have thought you're from the Midwest," because developed more, rest of my years down here, my language, my accent's a little more neutral. Like I said, that kind of Midwestern. People always peg me for Midwestern, just because, I moved and I lived in different areas.
And
but
all you've done is listen to TV, movies, radio.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where your accent came from.
Yeah.
That's why the Southern accent exists, is because, one of the theories is that it developed from nannies, that the people who were taking care of the kids were African slaves, and their English was not the best, but it was a combination of the South's desire to have a landed gentry-style lifestyle like the British combined. So there were some attempts to, wow, I'm eclipsed. There's some attempts to have kind of a British accent instilled by their tutors and their private teachers, but then the people who were taking care of the kids, the nannies and the servants, had a different accent, and the combination has helped produce the Southern accent that we all know so well. And, clearly that was not the plan, but that was the result. And now my headphones have been pulled out by the cat, so I'm off.
Well, you talk about accents, and as long as we're going off in this area, mutant accents. You might have populations where, just because of the way the mutations worked out, have different types of vocal cords, different shaped throats, different muscle arrangements in the face. Actually, I did that in a Gamma World game ages ago. Any mutant that had growths on their face, they would sort of talk like this because the growths would kind of get in the way of the way their jaws moved, and that became a thing. You could immediately tell that you were talking to a particular kind of mutant because they would just sort of talk like this. How you guys doing?
I'm immediately reminded of the second and third generation survivors in Threads.
Oh yeah, well,
the combination of being developmentally disabled from the radiation in womb, plus bad nutrition, plus no education, produces this. Starts to produce this. I don't know.
Well,
this pigeon.
Well, let me talk about that. We talked about that when we did the Threads episode. We talked about Threads. Now, one of our listeners who was from that area said that, they kind of talk like that now. So, the kids, the way they talked, give some, just this guttural, that urban way they talk. They said it really didn't degrade as much as you think, because again, we're not from that area. We don't know how people really talk there. He goes, they kind of talk like that now already. So it didn't really go that far down the spiral, believe it or not. I was like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And that brings up the topic of not just linguistic drift, but outright linguistic decay, depending on what survival pressures different pockets of civilization are under. That the language might get shrunken down real quick. We were joking about that, before, of just saying, "Oh, we will be smart. We will make machine go." That might actually happen.
Yeah. Well, again, depending on how many people you're building back from, especially, and then throw 2-3 generations on the problem. Far too often, my visions of the apocalypse are not are closer to Bryn's Postman than they are to what was the Road Builders one? Eternity Road.
Eternity Road.
Where, if I remember correctly, in Eternity Road, when they got up to the Great Lakes, they encountered pirates, sort of these pirates on the Great Lakes. And having come from what was, I guess, Arkansas, they did not recognize anything. They came from the Mississippi Valley. They did not recognize that language at all. But that was 1,000 years in the future.
It was a very long
maybe the implication was that it was French Canadian.
If especially it was around the Great Lakes, that's a very distinct possibility that could have been. But also look at this. Something else it made me think about. Again, I said dialects, the way people talk, and the shortening of language, like Will said. It's like, well, let's get rid of all these unnecessary words and just say what we mean and just keep it short. But also, are you guys ever seen on Discovery there's a show. They had like one season of it. It was like it was about this family in Alaska. I forget what it's called now. It was like
It wasn't Sarah Palin's America, was it?
no. It was about this. It's about this family that lives in Alaska.
Speaking of illiterates who can barely speak.
Well, that's a whole other topic. But no, it's this family. Alaskan, I can't remember. Somebody's gonna post and say what it is, but it was a show like Alaska Frontier or something. It was just about this family, man and woman. They were from Texas. They picked up many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, moved to Alaska. They live out on their own. They live in the wild. They get some land. They build their own stuff. They hunt, and they have like 8 kids. All growing up, living in boats, living in cars, living in cabins, whatever they could get and have. And in one of these episodes, they talk about, people say we talk with an accent, that we have a funny accent. And they do. They have a very unusual accent. And they're like, we don't hear any accent. And it's funny how, because these kids grew up not in schools, not in houses, not in urban America, not urban, not city. They grew up in the woods. They grew up moving around. And where they heard their language from was people they encountered and their parents, and all the kids have this particular accent that's very kind of unusual, almost kind of lispy accent. This is just one basically one generation, because the kids range anywhere from like 14 to 30, so it's not a huge gap.
Are you guys familiar? Are you guys familiar with there's a story I keep hearing about Castilian Spanish, that Spanish from Spain lisps a number of pronunciations. Cerveza with a hard C, like in Mexico you say cerveza, it's cerveza in Castilian Spanish. And the often repeated story, which I have no idea whether it's true or not, is that at some point, one of our long-reigning monarchs had a speech impediment, like a cleft palate or something, or a lisp, and everybody at court started adopting the lisp so they wouldn't annoy him by speaking better than the king. And this accent descended, this speech impediment descended into became an accent. I have no idea if that story is true.
I've heard the same story. The version that I heard was that the king was popular enough among his courtiers that it became fashionable to speak that way, and within a few years, speaking with a lisp became like a sign of sophistication. So everybody wanted to do it.
But imagine that in post-apocalyptic terms. Imagine that this family, isolated, is speaking like the dad. And you said there's a bit of a lisp. Well, if dad has one.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. It's just it's not like it's not a major, but it's not like lisp, but that's the only term I can equate to it right now off the top of my head. But it's like
a little more sibilant. They stress their S's a little much.
Yeah, but it's definitely different from the way he talks, and just from they grew up in isolation. So my point was, you take that to, again, these pockets of this bunker, where people are surviving and growing up in generations, or isolated cabins, and eventually people come together. They're definitely there's going to be different accents, the way people talk, big terms. Language is going to really diversify and break up. That's for sure.
Well, that's one of the standard. I think one of the standard things in apocalyptic thinking is that the convenient society that we have, where we can get our grapes from California and our beef from Texas and whatever. That once the ease of transporting goods disappears, we're going to have this sudden, everything's going to have to be very rural, or everything's going to be very regional, and the same thing's true for language. But the idea of that, if you've got some patriarch running his community, language could be very dictated by the peculiarities of his accent to start with, or his speech impediment, or whatever. You know what I mean? That could be, and then it becomes a badge of office. Well, the last king spoke with like he had a cleft palate. Everyone else, if you have the king job, or warlord, or overseer, or whatever job is their new job, systems manager. All hail the systems manager. Then suddenly they're going to adopt that as part of the persona of leader, and it'll be something that people will want to aspire to. Well, if the leader talks like that, I have a better chance of being the leader if I take on his characteristics. So that sounds a little bit like the strong man theory or the great man theory of history, but in an isolated, smaller community, it might have more of an impact, than a Genghis Khan or a Louis the Sun King, sort of filtering down through the rest of society. Do we have any specific examples from fiction we want to throw out for people where we thought that they did an interesting job developing language in a way to show that time has passed, that history has moved on, and that things have changed?
Well, you have a good example in that movie.
That is not what I would describe as a good example at all. That
was sarcasm, by the way.
Yes. I strongly suspected. There's a film called America 3000. I ran across it on a YouTube channel where a guy does tributes to cheesy movies. And if you go to Brandon T. Hold's channel, and we'll link to the episode he does, America 3000, his 20-minute review of the film with clips from the movie pretty much tells you everything you need to know about America 3000. But it is stuffed to the gills with that sort of that other language, that dialect that you got from things like, wow, I'm eclipsed again, things like Clockwork Orange, and except that, Clockwork Orange did this thing where, you just hung on for the ride, and eventually the words made sense because you stayed with the character long enough until you realized what his language was. America 3000 not only has new words for everything like men and women, and no one ever gets killed, they get nuked. Nuked is now the word for death in this post-apocalyptic society. But not only is there all that, but they then have a narrator go to the trouble of explaining what everything means,
which defeats the purpose of it.
Utterly. What was the word that they said in old speak? That's what people in old speak, when they meant crazy, they'd say "kuglots" or whatever it was. I can't remember what the term was.
If this narrator is a character in the movie and knows the old speak, if you know the old speak, why the fuck aren't they using the old speak?
Yeah, why aren't you speaking the old speak? You have to tell me what it all means in old speak. God damn it! It's kind of horrifying on every way it can be horrifying, and it's got some Playboy bunnies in it at some point, I think. It's pretty awful. It's clearly, it's the equivalent of it's the equivalent of the sci-fi film shot in the gravel quarry. It's it's no good.
Well, here's another good example. Is we mentioned the film before this show, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. What about all the kids?
Yes.
Oh yeah, they had a really kind of developed internal pidgin language.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, because the plane crashed when they were very young. The oldest ones were very young when that happened. So it's not just they're British, British Australian accents, but they definitely had different terms for doing different things, and they even had a little bit, like Will said, a little bit of shortening of things to an extent. No real written language you could see. It was all mainly just hieroglyphs, basically drawings of the different things they told what it was, because that's one thing, the spoken language won't disappear. People are still going to talk. People are still going to learn how to talk.
I agree. I think we all agree that the film Thunderdome takes a dive after Max is outside of Thunderdome. Or maybe it really takes a dive when he goes back. But my favorite moment of telling the story with the pictographs, where you know,
where they would hold up the TV screen in front of what they wanted people to look at. I love that.
Yes, the TV screen on the end of the pole, like that's their framing device. You know, whatever's going on is inside the box. So that was kind of awesome. That was actually.
I know, despite it not being this constant road chase scene like the other film, what they did with that, really, if we really step back and take our 1985 disdain out of it, when we were seeing it, it really wasn't that bad.
As far as I'm concerned, the film really started sucking when they started having a road chase in a straight line.
Yeah.
Trying to recreate the last part of road where they should have done something completely different, and in their attempt to pander, they failed utterly. But even so, the isolated idea of tribals, which is and oh my God, frickin' Fallout, actually made some real interesting successes in the DLC Honest Hearts content, where and even earlier stuff. In Fallout 2, you ran into tribals for the first time, and they have a degenerated English language. But the tribals in Honest Hearts, there's a section of them who are clearly made out of the descendants of German tourists who are camping in Zion Canyon after the bomb because they use German. Their language is, they're like, someone who's not in the tribe is an Ausmann, and they keep using the word gut, G-U-T, for good, and there's all this weird German mixed into their American Indian style dialect because they're descended from an isolated group of people who are after the apocalypse. That was quite a nice touch, as far as I was concerned. I really liked the languages of the tribals in that DLC.
We don't actually. Speaking of that, I wish I could remember what this was. I'm pretty sure this was a novel that I read when I was in high school. Hopefully, someone will remind me because I would love to track this down again. But and it took place around kind of like it took place in and around what's now kind of like Amish country and like adjacent counties, but because internally certain Amish and Rhenish settlements do speak a form of German that was left over from the Pennsylvania Dutch, that became a dominant language because these people who were already living without much technology, were far away from urban areas, were ideally positioned to survive the apocalypse. And so their language spread. So that whole part of the country was speaking this kind of Pennsylvania Dutch language.
That works for me. In fact,
does not ring any bells to me.
The short story collection that Silvia Morena Garcia sent to us about Canadian, was it Shattered? Was that it? Shattered.
Yeah.
There is a story in there that is completely written in a devolved form of English, from the perspective of some people who are fighting over some resources in the ruins, and one group's trying to push the other group out of the area that they've claimed, and it's all written in that degenerate language, and it's effective. Things are completely fucked when all the spelling is off center and all the and it's a chore to read. The story can be a chore to read, but it was rewarding for me. Sadly, I don't have it in front of me. I feel it'd be weird to jump up in the middle of a podcast or run in the other room to get it, but that was one of the better bits inside Shattered that I would recommend.
Then also something else that would happen besides the shortening of language, and we talked a little bit about this too. It's like how the names of things would change, also how the names of things will be forgotten as well. Right. Because especially if you're not continuing to educate people on every little nuance, like they hit on that a little bit in what's the story I read? The Earth Abides.
Okay.
It's about this, it was a plague story. Wiped out a lot of the population. This one character travels around the country trying to find other people, and eventually finds that the people start building small groups, communities, and building. And then, as the story gets towards the the latter 2/3, it starts jumping ahead in years. It probably goes ahead, couple of like 2 generations. I think because like what's left is like he's like left and like he's like this almost godlike character because he's from the before time. He's like really like he's like in his like 70s, 80s, and like he's like somebody's like they got very tribal, like one of his like great grandkids, because he tried to continue to educate people, but this first generation just did not give a crap, so like language and names and things completely disappeared like very fast in this story, which I don't know how realistic it is, but again, we've never had that happen, but because like they didn't want to learn, and because they were all the adults were too like, okay, well, we're not going to do anything. It was kind of weird. I don't think that would have happened that way. But
later iterations of Gamma World used to do that on the maps. I mean, the first generation of Gamma World maps did not name cities in the ruins, locations of cities. I guess because partly it's like, well, it's all a mystery to you. You don't have a name for it.
Yeah, well, people are gonna have like a verbal name for it, but like in the story, it's like they forgot the name. Like they used change to make arrowheads for their bows and arrows. They didn't know what they were. They were just metal things. They didn't know that it was a coin. They didn't know what it was used for, and that was very much in that story. Like so much stuff was just forgotten. They didn't know what so much stuff was. There's like, oh, that's the old stuff. They didn't know what it was, didn't know what it was used for, didn't know what it was called.
It's just conveniently smelted pieces of metal that we will now use to make arrowheads.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, it was everything. Most of it, they just basically became, tribal after a couple generations and left the cities and didn't know what anything was anymore like that quickly because they forgot. They didn't know because nobody was continued to call it certain things, and certain names got changed. So, again, it seems to be very much, like I said, a common theme, a trope, if you would, of post-apocalyptic novels and stories and games, and it's probably very true because, again, if you're not continuing to perpetuate education of speaking, knowing what things are called, writing things, how things are spelled, it's gonna happen. It's gonna degenerate like that. The media, like Scott mentioned, like everybody knows things are passed down from media down, it filters down. If all that's gone, what's left?
Well, going further, we might lose a name for something. There's going to come a time where we might need a word for that thing again, so we're going to have to make one up. We have sweet potatoes, we have yams, but who knows? Maybe these survivors live in the one place where you can't grow potatoes of any kind, and it just gets forgotten. Then, one day, 100, 200 years down the line, someone is desperate to eat, is scrabbling in the dirt, digs up the first yam anyone's seen in 200 years. He's not going to know it's called a yam. No one is. So he's just probably going to call it sweet root. It's obviously a plant's root, but it's sweet. So congratulations, you've discovered sweet root, and that's what it's going to be called from then on out.
Yeah, one presumes, though, that when it comes to things like that, a lot of that's going to come from trade. And if people have held on to an item and then move it around, it's going to hold on to its name, except that, yes, the guys trading it might be, in an early form or in a post-apocalyptic form of Madison Avenue, might change the names of things to things they think might sell better. If yam, that doesn't tell my customer anything. It's a sweet root. You want them to know they can make sugar out of it, or possibly distill it into alcohol or whatever. You put the function of it right in the title. So you don't have to. Revolver, what do you mean it's a revolver? What does it turn around? No, it's a shooter. Here, you shoot things
death
with
spinner.
It's
a fire stick,
Yeah. Boom. I think Bruce Campbell established definitively that it is a boomstick.
Boomstick is
you primitive screwheads. So yeah, you might have people who are moving and trading this stuff around, coming up with names to define items that are new to a region in manners that their customers would appreciate them, and therefore it changes the story, it changes the item completely.
And that's actually I mean that still happens today. There's this fish called monkfish. It's ugly as sin. It looks like a mutant fish. The only reason it's called monkfish is that they needed to find a way to sell it, because before restaurants were calling it monkfish, it goes by the name the frogfish, the sea devil, the fishing frog, or the Lophias. None of those are appetizing names, but the moment they dubbed it the monkfish and no one had to look directly at it, it became a delicacy.
Is that the one that's got the face almost looks human, like kind of.
It looks like a deep one face, actually.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's got this Petrarchian visage.
And it's kind of like fleshy looking. It's kind of white and pink. It's all just hideous.
Actually, no, it's dark. It's kind of a mottled black and brown.
Oh, even more appetizing. Okay, there's all kinds of things you'll put in your mouth after they've taken its face off and removed any vestige of what it was before, and now it's just here's some meat.
Okay, now I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's like that flat kind of. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
So
it's like a flounder-looking kind of, hideous sea monster. If you increased it, to 100 feet long, it would be like the terror of the ocean kind of look. Yeah.
But
sits at the bottom of ambushes. Go ahead.
Do you think we'll have to come up with new names for human flesh if we ever have to start eating it, or will we stick with the words we already have, like long pig and sweetbreads?
I read two novels, Through Darkest America and what is this? It might be Through Darkest America. I think the sequel's like Twilight's Last Gleaming or something. But it was a world where they had institutionalized. It's maybe early 19th century technology. Level post-apocalyptic. We've come back to sort of a black powder level of civilization. There is something called a president, but it appears to be more like a king that no one ever sees or hears from and is far, far, far away. And there is cattle. And cattle wanders around with 2 arms and 2 legs and 2 eyes and bilateral symmetry. And, bears live young and isn't very hairy from the neck down, and everyone just goes, no, it's cattle, just cattle, and no one said it's just steak and beef and whatever, and they make the very they say very loudly and very clearly, cattle doesn't have a soul. That's the difference. Does not have a soul. It's fine. We're not doing anything wrong. And it was just this theme that went all through the story. And at some point, the main character gets the big wake-up call, and obviously dinner is off for the rest of the story. He is less than pleased with the options once he realizes what's going on. But they just applied all of these standard beef and cattle names to it. They just moved them over. Cows are extinct in this world, and that was the change for cannibalism. They just called it steak. They just called it brisket.
Lunch. It's now called lunch.
It's not called lunch. So they didn't even have anything to differentiate it at all. The implication was that there were no domesticated animals were few and far between in this world, and that rather than have the Morlocks living underground while they prey on the Eloi that they keep on the surface as their free-range food, that this society, everyone was above ground and had just created different classes of society, humans and cattle. So there.
Oh, that is dark.
Yeah, it was pretty grisly, to say the least. it was a world where the more the kid from down on the farm, down on the cattle ranch, learns about his world, the more he sort of realizes there's no part of it that doesn't need to get nuked again. I mean, there was almost no hope for a better future through either one of these novels. It was just the awful just kept getting bigger the more he learned about his environment. Now that one didn't have any other big changes in language, except that they were it was an expanding world where they had run into at some point they run into when at some point it goes from the East Coast to the West Coast, goes through the post-apocalyptic Panama Canal, which is just a breach in the land now, right? Because the Panama Canal was nuked during the war excessively. It is now there's actually a break. There's a passage that doesn't require locks or anything, and all the population back down there was heavily mixed in with Caribbean and Latin American and Indian, which were all people he had never seen. There was this one sort of nightmarish moment where he goes to the county fair in his world before he gets his big wake-up call. And you'll pardon my French here, but even though he'd gone and seen it last year and paid a nickel to get in the tent to see it, this year he still went back to pay a nickel and go in the tent to see the nigger. And
that's what they advertised.
Yes, and there's this, and what it is it's a black guy like poor old Landon from Planet of the Apes who's been killed and stuffed. And he's like, the nigger looks a little rattier than it did last year. It's kind of worn, and the stuffing's coming out. And it was, so fucked up. And then when he goes down to Central America and runs into all these, people descended from Caribbean and Central America, he just starts throwing that word around. And the guy he's with is like, you need to shut the fuck up now before, there's not a lot of words that carry over from the past times, but that's one of them, and that's pretty much an invitation to get your ass kicked. So you need to shut up now. But yeah, it was horrible. It was that same thing where no one's going to tell him that it's not the right word, so he's going to use it. And I guess that's another example of language, that since there's fuck Jared, coms and yangs.
Yep, I was gonna.
Oh yeah.
And
the E-plebnista! How could we forget about the E-plebnista?
Well, I was gonna bring up Star Trek also because we would have led into that because remember the one where they go down to the planet and all the adults have died because of this serum for like immortality, and all the kids are like 50, 60, 100, 300 years old, but they're kids. The Grups, and they started having their own terms because they've been. The Grups, they've been kids for a couple hundred years. They just don't
was one of the best. Grups is one of the best slang terms ever.
Yeah,
Grups was awesome.
So Star Trek again has touched on post-apocalyptic language several times. That episode and the ones with the Yangs and the Khans.
So it's Miri, I think, is the one with the Grups.
Yeah, that's Miri.
Yeah, and it's Omega Glory for the Coms and the Yangs and the E-plebnista. I wish I could have memorized is the part where they start doing the Pledge of Allegiance. That's one of my favorite moments where they get out the tattered banner and they start stumbling through I pledge allegiance to the flag.
It's like we know this. I pledge allegiance to the. How do you know the sacred words? Because they're my secret words too.
What I love is that they're sitting there speaking English, but somehow you forgot these English words. Okay, what the fuck is going on here?
The universal translator. The universal translator is a finicky piece of technology.
Yes, I see.
Because it translates the words. Well, if we're gonna talk about that, Will. Let's go to one of my favorite Star Trek episodes from Next Generation. The children of what is it, Will? You know what I'm talking about.
Mokhtar. It's like Mokhtar with arms closed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jalad. Because that's a perfect example of the universal translator translates it to English, but they don't know what the fuck they're talking about because they speak in metaphor. So again, that's a language barrier. Like, yes, we understand the words you're saying, but we don't know what you mean.
that was one of the nicest little riffs on the idea that you can. Well, I understand. I guess I understand, but I don't comprehend. Is that where we're at with that?
Yeah. You know.
So again, you get the same thing with your post-apocalyptic language when somebody's talking about their grups or their coms, their yangs, or Nuke in the long back. Yeah. Mr. Dead, all got snatched by Mr. Dead or whatever, and so that would be that kind of thing. I really think that's effective in fiction. If you're going to show that there's been a passage of time in civilization, that really does work, but it's tough, and it's tough to do well. There's some of it in
well, because you're predicting unpredictable things.
Is there some of that in Ellison's Boy and His Dog? Isn't there some different terms for stuff like rovers or something? I mean,
yeah, and there are those gangs, and all the gang names are like taken from like old movies. So there's like the Little Rascals is one of the gangs because that's just a word that survived, and they had some of the old films.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's like the ones that make like the ammo. Don't they like call themselves like Green Berets or something?
The 82nd Airborne.
82nd Airborne.
The armors were called the 82nd Airborne, if I remember correctly. I was thinking of like and naming things Mariga. Wasn't that the Gamma World name for North America? Was Mariga?
That sounds right. I know that in one of the later editions they had the city of Settle, which was just Seattle, but the sign got damaged. But it's a settlement, so it works.
Yeah. Everyone loves the pit from Fallout 3 for Pittsburgh.
Oh, yeah. That can actually be a fun like way to figure out what is the post-apocalyptic name for a particular area, and it's always, and this is I think like true across the board. A lot of post-apocalyptic terms happen because they shorten an existing word. So settle, the pit. I know there's one where there's like Ashing, but it's just like Washington. It's supposed to be Washington.
That was definitely from By the Waters of Babylon. Where the guy
that's the one.
Paddles into the ancient city on his rite of passage to get like an artifact and bring it back, and there's a statue where it's just the feet, and it says Ashing, and I didn't get it. I didn't get it that it was a statue of Washington. It's
supposed to be a statue of George Washington. But it's always the words getting shortened. It's never an anagram.
Well, that's true. But also, in a Gamma World game that I played, again, this is way back in high school. The campaign that we were in, we went to we wound up in one of these things. We wound up in this old logging camp facility, and it was in Arkansas. Now, our characters, or one of our characters, had a smattering, knew the ancient tongue, and he read it, and he literally read what it says. If you just take Arkansas for what it says Arkansas. There's no W in there. You wouldn't know to call it Arkansas, so we just called it like, they saw the map. We're in Arkansas, and we called
later when we find Kansas, we figure, R must be the ancient word for south.
Exactly. So we saw we're in Arkansas. So I've actually done that before. We've taken the language and just tried to, just take it for exactly what it is,
Well, there you go. I got to tell you, right off the bat, my post-apocalyptic world, the state of Missouri is going to be known as the state of misery. It's just going to be, you're in misery.
Well, isn't that true? Isn't that true today, though?
Well, not the least of which, because the state of Missouri, isn't that the well, I guess not. I was going to say that it's part of the setting for the day after. So it's got that extra misery because, Lawrence, Kansas has been blown up
we
again.
That further, Detroit could be destroyed.
Destroyed. Yes, welcome to Destroyed.
Destroyed. And that's how it appears on all the maps. Destroyed.
Yeah, well, it is kind of destroyed it already.
We obviously Nuke York. I mean, it would have to be Nuke York.
Actually, to invoke. I was like to invoke Andy Hobb. In his
Okay.
post-apocalyptic game Low Life, there's this land called Glowhio.
All right, Glowhio, that works for me. I'm going with Abba Blamma. But that's it. That's all I've got. Abba Blamma. Wow.
All right, so as apparently we are winding down.
Yes,
Right now.
we're now just into silliness.
Oh, actually, I did have one kind of serious point to make, and this was inspired by the Dan Simmons Hyperion novels end with a soft apocalypse where the big intergalactic civilization is destroyed because they have wormholes that let them travel instantly between any point in this empire. Well, those all go away. And from that point forward, even the closest star systems, it's going to take years, half a decade, to send a ship one way, and then another half a decade to send it back. But they still want a continuity of civilization. And what ends up happening is that in this future, as this collapse is about to happen, Catholic Church sets itself up as the continuity of civilization because they can send people to a planet, and even if there's a token presence of the Catholic Church, they will always speak formal Latin. And that will allow them to communicate on any planet they go to because the priests will know formalized Latin, but then they'll also know the local language. And that's something that kind of I don't see played around with enough in the apocalypse because even if apocalypse is just on Earth, if that kind of very structured church is continuing, the liturgical language will still exist, and that will be a way to kind of to unite people and communicate between people. And it goes beyond that. Hebrew. Learning Hebrew is such a big part of the Jewish tradition. That's, I think, a written and a spoken language that would be very hard to change or wipe out or have fade out after the apocalypse.
I guess that would be the same thing with Arabic because Arabic is directly connected to the faith. That you're not really reading the Quran unless it's in Arabic. It's adulterated if it's been translated into Turkish or Farsi.
Well, doesn't a Canatel for Leibowitz kind of touch on that a little bit?
That was where I was going to go with this. Is that let's go to Canonical for Leibowitz. Canonical. I don't remember that. I mean, it's been decades since I've read it, but I don't remember language being an issue in Canonical for Leibowitz at all.
Well, because it was all the doctrine and the teachings of the church and the Latin and stuff, so it kind of kept it did kind of keep a universal language around because they taught the Bible, they taught it in the faith, they kept the faith, they kept religion, they kept the structure of the church, and spoke Latin and used Latin. So that kind of was kind of a loose example. Like
I do not, like I said, I don't remember the Latin in Canonical for Leibowitz, but the whole point of the novel was to recast post-nuclear America as the medieval Dark Ages. So it would not shock me in the least that I'm just not remembering it.
Yeah.
Are there any other fictional examples? Oh, okay. We've hit on some of our favorite things: Fallout, Gamma World. How about Deathlands? Because in the earliest Deathlands novels, I think it's the #2 one out of the gate. They go to Alaska, they run into Russians, and they present an absolute language barrier between the Russian characters and the American characters who cannot communicate at all. There's no Cyrillic versus Latin letters. They got, there's no way they can communicate. I mean, they do a little sign language and whatever, but on their second meeting, when the Russian returning, he's not really the main enemy in the first story, but having encountered America and realized that there is an America to encounter, he returns to Moscow Center and sets himself to learning English, because we're going to have to learn it, because clearly we didn't finish the Americans off after the Big Death. Was it the Great Death, the Big Death? What did they call the apocalypse in
Red Holocaust? I don't remember.
I want to say they called it the Death or the Big Death, and so he sets to work, trying to find something in English, and I think he gets some 1887, a British Traveler's Guide to Russian or something, and sort of reverse engineers it so he can speak this weirdly British accented, English when he re-encounters Ryan Condor and his pack of murder hobos, because, oh my God, if ever there was a group of fictional characters who more closely remembered player characters from a role-playing game, it's those guys from Deathlands. They are the murder hobos.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, they touch on that in a Six-String Samurai, where the apocalypse happened as Russia was trying to invade the United States. So the apocalypse happens, there's no more Russia, there's no more United States, but all these Russian-speaking people are now stranded in America. So, like, randomly throughout the movie, they keep coming across people who speak Russian or speak English with these ridiculously thick Cold War spy Russian accents. I do not like your rock and roll music. I like this soft music. The waltz, the polka. It is too loud.
Nice music, yeah.
Very Boris Badenoff. It's flat out Boris Badenoff.
Which that's actually something. Would there be people who because of what media survived might actually learn how to speak from like old cartoons or something, or like if you had people who grew up in these different bunkers, but all the bunkers were equipped with the same standard issue safety films, would they come out of the bunkers 200 years later talking like the people in those safety films?
Well,
hello, buddy. Looks like you're having problems with your water pump. Perhaps I can help you.
Well, no. What's the movie, Scott? Where the kids grew up in the bunker and all they had was like
radioactive dreams, and they come out of the bunker talking like Humphrey Bogart because they've seen all the. I was going to go straight to Paranoia, the role-playing game Paranoia, because there's this one part where the computer is obsessed with communists, finding communists and destroying the communists who are trying to destroy America, despite the fact there aren't any. But there's one resistance group that decides that if the computer hates communists, then maybe there's something to this communism. So they desperately try to be communists, but it's based on all the computer's sort of presentation of what communism is. So they go to their meetings and they put on their Joseph Stalin mustaches and they speak in terrible. And they big fur hats, and then they speak in terrible, terrible Boris Badenoff accents because they think that's what communists are. Is that
talk about bringing down the imperialist West, even though they don't know what the West is or what imperialism is.
Yes, exactly. They've just adopted all these things from this badly remembered. Well, how is that again?
Well, Paranoia has some fun stuff like that. There's a running gag in the edition that I have, which I think is 4th or 5th, where trademark is actually pronounced. Like if there's a word that ends with like a trademarked word, you pronounce the trademark. Which like there's like a secret society where their code is the force is with you, TM. Because it's written down.
I was hoping they would say the force is with you, TM. They just.
They gave a pronunciation guide. It's like T-E-E-M-E-E. Or T-E-E-M or something like that.
Yeah, T-M. All right, T-M.
Tim.
That's great.
All right, so...
I can't think of any other really good fictional examples of off the top of my head, but again, it's a little hard to get better than the E-Plebnista. That one really may be the top of the iceberg as far as the pinnacle of degraded language in a post-apocalyptic setting.
Okay, so folks, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up because I don't think I said we could come up with a lot of the good examples that we're going to come up with, with just trying to dredge our memories.
It's going to be a bit of a jerk off after a while. You guys should just go. It's time for you to stop listening. Go on to something else in your lives.
Yeah. Well, so we are going to wrap it up. So basically, I think we've assessed that language and writing out the apocalypse ain't gonna be good afterwards necessarily. So we've speculated on a lot of realistic possibilities, some fun things that we've encountered. Some, again, it's
your grammar glows, chummer.
Well, I have Shadowrun slang. Anyway, so
what are you, some kind of mutie?
Let's slot and run. Okay, we're gonna slot and run right now, folks. Okay, so Thank you for joining us this week, folks. That's been Language in the Apocalypse. So hopefully we've brought some things to your attention you haven't thought of before, and we hope, as usual, you were entertained. So again, like I said, all of these shows are posted audio. So if you don't have a chance to watch the video, you can listen to the audio. I'll have the audio for this one up here in the next couple of days, folks. And remember to always be socially responsible. If you haven't liked us on Facebook, if you don't subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter. If you haven't done any of that stuff, please go ahead and do it. And then if you have any friends who are interested in this type of subject matter, please share with them. We'll be back in 2 weeks for our normal show. What we're going to do yet, don't know. Me and Scott will talk about it during the week, and when we know, we'll let you know. So we'd like to keep it a surprise sometimes, or we just haven't talked about it yet, so we don't have it solid yet. So
we're lazy podcasters.
Yeah, well, no, we did pretty good for a while. We had a whole bunch lined up, so that's okay. We'll talk about it. We'll figure out what we're going to talk about. So that's it, folks. Thank you.
If you think the show does not glow, please tell your chummers. Tell your pack mates or whatever you mutants call yourselves out there. Spread the word.
So, Will, thank you again for joining us this week. Again, like I always say, you always have a lot to bring to the table. Good perspective on things. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Check me out on Twitter at Internet Mayor. Also, I'd like to propose in a post-apocalyptic world that a growth is the term for a group of mutants. It's a growth of mutants.
Not a murder, not a flock, not a pride, a growth.
A growth.
I would suggest an eruption of mutants.
That could be taken in so many wrong ways. So on that note, thank you, Scott. This is Jared, the Apocalypse Nerd, and Annabomb Glancy, and William T. Thrasher saying thank you and good night.